Hi friends, my name is Miss Sykes and I am a first grade Title I reading teacher in Central Ohio. Today we're going to be reading the story Mr. Hobson's Garden by Marc Gave, and then we'll be answering some questions together about the character, setting, problem, and solution. So let's get started. For this lesson today, you are only going to need your ears, as I'm going to need you to be listening and then answering some questions. Mr. Hobson's Garden. Mr. Hobson's garden wasn't always a garden. A house used to stand there. But the house was so old that it got torn down. All that was left was an empty lot. People started throwing things in the lot. They threw paper and boxes. They even threw away an old chair. The lot looked bad and smelled worse. Going to and from school, I had to pass the lot. One day, the trash began to go away. Every day, more was gone. After a week, the lot was empty again. "Who took all that trash away?" I asked my neighbor, Mrs. Rays. "Mr. Hobson," she said. "He's the man who lives next to the lot. He got tired of living next to such an ugly place." The next day, the lot was filled with brown soil. "What's happening?" I asked Mrs. Rays. "Mr. Hobson is planting a garden," she said. Every day I saw Mr. Hobson planting seeds in the ground. He used a hose to water the garden. In the spring, I saw birds and bees and butterflies flying around the garden. By summer, it was full of green plants, flowers, and vegetables. Mr. Hobson's garden was the best thing to happen to our block. One day, the garden didn't look good. The next day, it looked worse. After a week, the plants were drooping. "What's the matter with Mr. Hobson's garden?" I asked Mrs. Rays. "Didn't you hear?" she said. "Mr. Hobson is very sick." I felt bad. Mr. Hobson might be sick for a long time. The garden would become an ugly old lot again. Mr. Hobson would be sad. I thought and thought. At last, I came up with a plan. That night, when Mom came home, I told her about it. "That's great, Sam," she said. The next night, some of the kids on our block came to our apartment. I told them about my plan. "We'll take care of Mr. Hobson's garden until he gets better." "That's a great plan," they all agreed. The next morning, we worked in Mr. Hobson's garden. We cut off dead leaves. We pulled weeds, and we picked vegetables. Before long, Mr. Hobson's garden started to look good again. Then Mr. Hobson began to feel better. Every day he watched us while we worked in the garden. "I can take over now," he said one day. "But we still want to help," we told him. From then on, we liked working in Mr. Hobson's garden even more. That's because it was our garden, too. All right, friends, so now that we've heard the story, let's ask and answer some questions together. First, let's talk about the characters in our story. Can you think of one character who was in our story? Remember, the characters are the people that were in our story. I can think of one that's in our title. Yeah, how about Mr. Hobson? I also thought of some other characters, like Mrs. Rays, Sam, the person who was telling the story, Sam's mom, and the other kids that helped Sam with the garden. Can you think of any other characters? Awesome. So now let's talk about the setting. We know that the setting is where a story takes place. And in this story, we saw a couple of things. We saw some tall buildings. We saw an empty lot. We saw neighbors that lived close together. And we saw fire escapes on the sides of the buildings. What do you suppose that means? Do you think this setting, the story took place in a jungle, on a farm, or in a city? That's right, this story took place in the city. We can tell by what they were talking about and what we saw in the pictures that this story was taking place in a place where there was lots of people and lots of buildings, which means it was taking place in the city. So let's talk about the problem and the solution in our story. We actually have 2 problems and 2 solutions, so we're going to talk about the first problem first. At the very beginning of our story, we know that there was an empty lot. We know that the house was torn down and the empty lot was left. What do you remember about that empty lot? Was it nice? Was it not very nice? What kind of details did they give you that might give us an idea as to what the problem with this lot might have been? Excellent. So we know that the empty lot was filled with trash and it smelled really bad. That sounds like a problem to me. How are we going to fix this problem? Now remember, another name for how we fix the problem is the solution. So the solution to the problem is what we're going to do, or what the characters in the story did, to help fix this problem that the empty lot was filled with trash and that it smelled really bad. I'll give you a hint. Mr. Hobson fixed this problem. Do you remember what Mr. Hobson did to help fix this problem? That's exactly right. Mr. Hobson cleaned it up and he planted a garden. So we don't have the empty lot anymore. Now it's a beautiful garden and it smells very nice. That takes us to our second problem in the story. The garden was doing a wonderful job and Mr. Hobson was able to take care of it. But then something happened that may have affected our garden. Do you remember what happened that affected the garden? That's exactly right. Mr. Hobson got sick. They told us that in the story we heard from Mrs. Reyes that Mr. Hobson was very sick. Our main character, Sam, wanted to do something to help. This is how he's going to solve the problem and come up with our solution. Do you remember what the solution to this problem was? That's exactly right. Sam and his friends took care of the garden for Mr. Hobson until he was better. So the solution to this problem was that Sam and his friends took care of the garden for Mr. Hobson. And just as a bonus, friends, what happened at the very end of our story? Yeah, that's right. So Mr. Hobson and the kids were all able to take care of the garden together because Mr. Hobson got better, but the kids still wanted to help. Really good job today, friends. For your individual practice, I just want you to answer this question. What is something you can do to help someone else? In our story, Sam and his friends helped Mr. Hobson by taking care of the garden while he was sick. So what about at your house? Is there a way you could help your mom or dad? Maybe you could help a little brother or sister, or an older brother or sister. What's something you can do at home to help somebody out? Leave a comment below if you come up with a great idea and let me know how it went when you tried it. Let's go ahead and rate our understanding of this lesson, friends. So remember, we were talking about characters, setting, problem, and solution. So if you got all of those things, you got both of our problems, both of our solutions, all of our characters, and our setting correct, then you're probably rocking and rolling over in the 5-star range. Good job! That means you can probably read stories by yourself and help to answer these questions. If you're somewhere in the 3 to 4-star range, then maybe we needed help answering a couple of the questions, or you need a quick refresher on what character, setting, problem, and solution are, but then once you got reminded, you were able to answer the questions. If you're somewhere in the 1 to 2-star range, then maybe we have some questions about what characters, setting, problem, and solution are, and we should do some more research into that before we start trying to answer those questions. So if that's the case, then I suggest watching this video again and seeing if anything we talked about helps you to learn what a character, setting, a problem, or a solution is in a story. and then ask a parent or a guardian to help read with you and answer those questions together. Rock on, superstars. You did an amazing job today, and I can't wait to see you next time. Bye!